You want to open up to Esther chapter 1. We continue the account of that chapter as we started our study last week, this new study on the book of Esther. We sort of got into it already, to be honest, last week, but we will pick that up. Since the first lesson was just the first 9 verses of the chapter, it was hard not to get into what it was leading up to. But we did point out and talk about how unique the book of Esther is and how it is special for multiple reasons. But one of the main things is because it's the only book of the Bible that doesn't mention God. God, either the word Yahweh or the word Elohim, either Hebrew word for God, one which means God and the other which means Jehovah or Yahweh, not in the book. And every single other of the 66 books has it at least once, one of those two words. But not the book of Esther. And as I said last week, and I'm firmly convinced that was all part of the Holy Spirit's design for the book. Not a coincidence. And wasn't that somebody went back and erased or blotted out all the times God was mentioned. But it's part of the book itself and the design, and therefore is one of the lessons of the book about God, which we saw last week, but we're probably going to see it every single week. Anytime you study any part of the book of Esther, that's one of the things that you can't help but reflect on is God is so busy throughout this whole thing. He's doing a lot, but He's never mentioned. Even Mordecai doesn't mention Him whenever he entertains to Esther that there might be something bigger going on here. He still doesn't even mention God. He just says, maybe you were put here for just this this time, which implies that some higher being did it, but he doesn't say that outright, at least. But just to refresh our memories, we're in the land of Persia as it is at this point in history. We are about 1,000 miles from Jerusalem, over 1,000 miles. And we are in the period after Cyrus rose up to let the Jews who wanted to return back to Jerusalem. And if you remember, there were those who did do that. And Ezra and Nehemiah talk about those. They follow those that line to Jerusalem. Esther is what is occurring later, but more or less in the meantime, back in the land of the heathen people in control. Sort of how Ezekiel and Daniel are contemporaries, and Ezekiel is out with the people of the Hebrews in the country of Babylonia, and Daniel is in the royal city of the Babylonians, prophesying to the pagans. So they go side by side. Well, Ezra and Nehemiah go with the Jews back to Jerusalem, whereas Esther and Mordecai are among those who stayed behind, and for whatever reason, probably multiple reasons, decided that they would stay in that land instead, which was totally, their prerogative. It's never suggested that was sinful for them to do or anything like that, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I've ever seen. But some of them chose that, and they could still serve God's purpose even away from the city of God, if you will. So our lesson here picks up from where we left off, which was this gigantic banquet. King Xerxes was the leader of the superpower of the day, and it was a superpower really in every extent of the word and the concept. And really what we're looking at here in this lesson is the events that led up to Esther, the namesake of the book, came into the picture. What she has to do with it. Chapter 1, you might say, has nothing to do with Esther, but it does have something to do with Esther. This is what happened to bring her into the picture. So that's why it's an important series of events. We also learned some things about Xerxes. in this that may set up a little bit of tension or nervousness on the part of the reader about how Esther is going to fare in this with this guy being the king. But that's getting ahead a little bit. We're looking at the queen at this time, whose name was Vashti. Don't know much about her. There are plenty of questions I would like to know the answers to, but we just don't have the answer. We're not given. The book of Esther is not the book of Vashti, so the details don't really tell us too much about her, but we do learn a little bit about her as well. So, remember that banquet? It was huge. It lasted like 6 months or something total. You know, we talked about how there were probably people who, it wasn't that the guests that were there at the beginning the entire time. I guess maybe they could have. I don't know. But it's not really that reasonable to host something for these people to come from all over the nation and stay for 180 days away from their homes. At the end of that 180 days, or maybe the last 7 days of it, or after the 100, an additional 7 days, a special feast was held for some select individuals. I guess probably maybe. This was the feast where he really started flashing his wealth, his power. Look at this that I've got. Served wine and gave the order that it is not to be limited or restricted in any way, and you are to let every one of these men do as they please. That leads us up to verse 9, which informs us that there was also another feast going on for the women. So here's a feast in probably the big, huge, great hall, the banquet hall. And then there's another one nearby in the same palace, somewhere on the premises, I guess, that the women were having a feast. And Queen Vashti, the queen of Persia at this time, was the hostess of this. So, verse 10 says, on the 7th day, the last day of this extra portion, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs, I'm not even going to try to say their names, I'll just skip over them. The 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of the king, of King Xerxes, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. One thing I probably should have mentioned just as a reminder, to avoid confusion, Xerxes is the name of this king. In history, that was, I guess, what we might call his more technical official name. He's called Ahasuerus in the Old Testament because I guess that's his Hebrew name. Another name by which he was known to the Jews, at least. I prefer to say Xerxes for multiple reasons, the most of which is because it's easier to say. So when I say Xerxes, and you're looking and if you're thinking, what in the world is he saying? I don't know how to pronounce that word, but I definitely don't think it's pronounced like that. That's why I'm saying that. Xerxes the first, king of Persia. So on the last day of this little extra feast, the heart of the king was merry with wine. Anybody want to paraphrase that? King was drunk. To one extent or another, that's what that expression means. His heart was merry with wine. All the cares were gone. He was having a good time. Felt good. He came up with, there's no warning or anything. Nothing is, the only thing that even serves as maybe a tiny warning or setup is that there was another feast with the women going on. There's nothing that gives any indication of why he thought, why this entered his mind. Probably because, there's anything else that can show these people to flex muscles and really make them stand in awe of me? Well, I haven't shown them my queen yet. So that's what he did, what he was going to do. That was his idea. He 7 eunuchs that served in his presence to go get her. Go over to the other banquet hall where the women are and command the queen. Actually, it doesn't really say to command her to be strictly, I guess it's called a command later, so it doesn't say command in verse 11, but it does refer to his command later in verse 12 and following. So he was told to go to that room and tell the queen, the king says, come here. And presumably, it was also told to her the reason. The language of verse 11 could go either way, whether they told her this or whether they just told her for this reason, or whether they told her the reason. It was, number 1, to bring her before the king. Number 2, with a royal crown. Some versions, the footnote in my Bible says headdress. And number 3, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty. Because number 3.5, I guess, she was lovely to look at. Apparently, I've never seen her. But, the standards of beauty, as they say, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Well, culture to culture, beauty can be judged differently. But apparently, in their culture at this time, she was quite a spectacle to look at, her beauty. Verse 12, though, says this. In fact, let's not even go to verse 12 yet. Let's think about what we alluded to last. Yeah, Dave. Yeah. Yeah. I guess there are 4 different types of people. There are ugly people who know they're ugly, okay? No disrespect. I'm probably one of them. There are ugly people who think they're beautiful. Beautiful people who don't know they're beautiful. And beautiful people who know they're beautiful people. In any case, you always can tell they're beautiful. Because like Dean said, they want to flaunt it, what they think they have. Whether it's here or somewhere else. That's kind of the name of the game for a lot of people. Flaunt the beauty. If you got it, flaunt it. That's sad to say, but that's an expression that some people live by. Well, that is more or less what Xerxes was wanting to do, but not for her glory, ironically. It was for his, again, take the first few verses, eight verses, sets the stage that all of this is about him. It's not about her. This part is not about her. Like, I want her to share in some of this glory. But any marveling that they did about her was reflected back on him. So what I wanted to point out is, as I said last week, you can see from the text of verse 11 that there is no, in my opinion, I don't see any indication whatsoever that she was expected to do anything lewd or inherently immoral in this. That's why I feel like what some commentators have done, and to be fair, it's based on the traditional interpretation of the Jewish rabbis, that she was supposed to come in there naked. Now, where they get that, I don't know. But they don't get it from the Holy Spirit inspired text of the book of Esther, because it's not suggested there. The only thing that's suggested in any way is that she was to be wearing her headdress or her crown. Now, it doesn't say that she was supposed to come in there, buck naked except for the crown. It just says she was supposed to come in there with the crown, and that's not what, that's not the same thing. So it seems to me that some have tried to find some evil here to excuse her defiance. That's what I have. That's my opinion, at least, about why some people are so adamant to make this something that other than what it simply says it is in the text.
It could have been an evil, though, for her to feel like she's being paraded like a circus.
Yeah, that could absolutely be the case. Whether she was, even if she was supposed to just get up from her seat and walk in there, which seems to me, with the exception of whether or not she had on this thing that he said for her to wear, she may have not been wearing that thing, but she was supposed to get that. Other than that, she was probably just getting up, going in there. The room full of drunk men. Now, remember, this was not necessarily the same kind of crowd that would have been present during this whole 6 months or however long it was. But there was still a decent group of drunken men, powerful men. And power can get some people drunk in itself. But whenever you're drunk, and in addition to being drunk with power, that's a pretty scary combination. Yes, sir.
A lot of times when you think if men are being drunk, sometimes the women are doing the same thing. But it don't say here in the women whether they were drunk or not.
Yeah, it's...
It appeared to be that at least she was in the right mind, thinking that she didn't want to be so alone.
It's possible that that her reaction implies that there was not this drunkenness going on in the women's feast. It's also possible that it could have been. They could have been getting drunk as well. And it might be that her reaction actually shows that she may have been under the influence a little bit because she had the nerve to do this. But we'll see more on that in just a second. Yeah, Debbie?
I don't know, I just have a feeling she just didn't like the king.
I can't imagine that she did. Yeah, if once you learn a little bit more. See, in this book, it doesn't tell us anything about him. Other than, the things that we pick up from last week's lesson could be said of any king in that day. Nebuchadnezzar, he did the same kind of thing, like, look at the great kingdom I've got. And God made him think twice about that and pronounced a judgment on him. And all this pompousness and this narcissism, that's how these men got where they are, is because that's the kind of men they were, unless they happened to inherit it from somebody else. And even in those cases, many times they were just like their fathers or their grandfathers. So we don't learn much about him, but in his secular history, we do learn about this king. Yeah.
And at that time, most of the marriages, especially between kings and queens, they were prearranged.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no, whether there was any love in the marriage or not.
Yeah.
They were already prearranged to be married, and that was it.
Yeah, another thing along those lines that we have to remember is not only was there probably not too much love going on in the marriage, there probably wasn't too much of anything going on between them because that's just the way that it was, sadly. Even with some of the kings of Israel. The queen was the queen, and until it was time for a child to be born, they probably didn't have a whole lot to do with each other. And that's probably good for the queen, as far as she's concerned, because sadly, the custom usually was that the king had all kinds of other women to see to those needs, whereas the queen's main role was to bear a royal child for the king. So we don't know how much they had to do with each other on a daily basis. I can't help but think probably not a whole lot, especially by our standards. But here's another thing I can't help but see in this situation. I alluded to it in passing last week. The queen is in a room with a bunch of women. And maybe I'm injecting standards of today into the old day.
They would expect her to obey the king.
Probably. But for what, again, there's no explanation given whatsoever. Just like there's no explanation given why he wanted this, although we can assume pretty safely, there's no explanation given to why she said no. Just to the next thing, she refused. Those are words you would expect to come across in verse 12. Because anytime the king commands anybody to do anything, the next thing that you expect to read is that they did it. They may not have liked it, but they're going to do it. Going back to the idea of we need a black and white line, we need a villain and a hero in this, is where I see people have interjected evil here, sin, inherent immorality in this, to make Vashti be a hero here. I'm not so sure she is a hero here. I'll just tell you. Because without the details that we might want, like why did she refuse? What was there anything else he was suggesting? Had something like this happened before? None of these things are answered. All we know is the king wanted her to come in there with a royal crown or her headdress to show her off to these guys. And then go back. I mean, here she is. Gawk at her all you want. You know, look at, she's mine. But here she sits with a whole host of also probably powerful, not near as powerful as her, powerful, and probably the wives of the men that are over there, presumably.
She had to know that this is not going to go over.
Yeah. She says, no. I would have loved to see the look on the faces of those eunuchs, or whichever one went in there to tell her. Because they probably were standing there like, what do we do now? She's the queen. This is not a pickle we expected to be in. We're going to get mobbed by these women is what's going to happen. And they may have just, scurried on out of the door like, let's get out of here. But the king hears about this. And as we might expect, he didn't like it at all. It says, he became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Burned. Yeah, you don't tell the king no, especially in front of the people he's trying to impress. Because you see what this does? It does exactly, it is the exact counter to what he was trying to accomplish. He's flexing his muscles, politically speaking, and his wife just told him no. It's kind of funny, if I'm being honest. One side of me wants to laugh. Again, I do not think that she was, I don't think it's right to assume that she was automatically justified in saying no, because we simply don't know what it exactly was involved in the request. For the text itself, all we can say is he just wanted to show them her beauty. Walk in here, look how beautiful she is. Look at my beautiful queen. She said no. Why do you think the king was so mad if I didn't just give the answer away? Or maybe you weren't listening, so I'll ask you. All right. Yeah, it's all on him. He's mad not because she didn't want to show her beauty. He's mad because he looks stupid now. This makes him look like a fool. He's made to look like some sort of weakling who don't have control of his wife. Boy, that's a burn for a man like him in this situation. With all, disregarding all vices that this man had. If you remember from our journey through the Bible, this is the man who, and I say this from memory, I hope I've got the right Xerxes. He's the man who whipped the sea. You remember I told you about the king who spanked the ocean because He was trying to build a bridge, and a storm came and destroyed it. So he goes and orders the sea to be spanked with a whip. That's not a joke. That actually happened. That's who we're dealing with here. A man who thought, how dare nature come and destroy my bridge that I said to be built, so I'm going to punish the sea. What a psycho is what a lunatic. Whipping the sea? How crazy. Herod the Great was crazy in his own right, but I don't know if there's ever anything where he did something that stupid. He was pure evil to the bone, but that is just another level. Spanking the sea. Well, that's just a sample of that to me says everything you need to know about this guy. That not very many people would do that, but he did. So now his wife has kind of done the same thing that storm did to his bridge, or that storm would do to his bridge. I don't think that had happened yet at this point in the narrative. In fact, I'm almost positive it had not that happened later. But during the span of the book of Esther, she says no. So now the king, the only relief that the king probably had at this point is that she didn't say no in front of the men that were there. She did say no, apparently, assuming that they heard. Okay, here's an assumption. They said it out loud, the king desires you to come, and she said out loud no. That may not have been the way it was, and I may have just put that in by my own assumption. They may have said it in private, and then she said no in private. That's very possible. And if that's the case, then I don't think the women being there and any influence that may have had indirectly had anything to do with it, if that was the case. If they said it out loud, it fits perfectly with this woman's banquet, at least by today's standards, for her to say, I ain't letting any man tell me what to do. No. But anyway, the king is angry. His anger is burning within him. So he consults with some of the men. In fact, not just some of the men, but which men? The wise men. Again, to refer back to our journey through the Bible, anytime any culture or nation that's in power or that's under consideration, the wise men come up. These were a certain class of men who were usually considered to be some kind of sorcerers or maybe sages of some kind. They're generally just called the wise men. They were, in fact, we get a little modification here. They were men who did what? According to the text. Okay, well, they advised the king, but it says here, according to the ESV, they knew the times. These wise men knew the times. In other words, they knew how to handle things in the right way, based on, I guess, the law and the customs and the culture. So, as one of the quotes in the book says, that they were specially chosen men, and usually what they did was determine suits and interpret the ancient laws of the land, and any point of dispute whatsoever was going to be referred to them, because they knew how to handle it. Just like if there's some, legal stuff is the most head-cramping, confusing, doesn't make any sense to a normal person like you or me. And you got to have, you're very blessed if you have somebody in your circle somewhere, or know a relative, or a relative knows a lawyer, because that's their thing. So, like, if I do this, can I get sued for some weird, fine print thing? I don't know, but this lawyer will. He'll know that kind of thing. These men, they knew the kinds of things that could be done according to the law. So he discusses with them, and I can't emphasize enough, the thing he was so mad about was that he was made to look, or felt, he may not have been made to look foolish in front of everybody, but he was made to feel foolish. You know, for this guy, he wouldn't have taken any comfort in, well, I'm glad none of the men heard any of this. If that was the case, they may have heard it. But I got a feeling, being drunk and in the shape he was in, he wasn't discreet about telling the 7 eunuchs what he wanted. He probably blurted it out and said, hey, come here, and, you know, bring her on in here. So the fact that she didn't come, even if they didn't know that she said no, they would have found out she said no because the queen didn't come. So that's what he was mad about. But probably, according to the law, he can't just punish her because she made him feel stupid.
But also being the advisement, if you're an advisor to a psycho, you're going to be in a situation where you have to really, I mean, they're obviously not going to tell him, like, you're correct. I mean, you know what I mean? They basically are kind of in a position where they kind of have to, you know what I'm saying, like cater to
They're walking on eggshells a lot, but I don't want to give them any credit that they don't deserve. I'm sure these men were just as slick and sly as any of them, anybody. And I think this situation shows that they were the perfect people for this job, at least the one who is credited with speaking up. But these guys knew, in my opinion, what I see here is Xerxes was asking them to find a way that he could legally punish her for doing this. Because if you remember, the laws of the Medes and Persians were very strange in a way. Because once the law was set in order, it could not be revoked. That's going to play a part in this, and it also plays a part in Daniel with the lion's den. They tricked the king at that time, Darius, to make this edict to get Daniel thrown into the lion's den, because once he put his seal on it, that law could not be revoked. That's crazy? Because even when he found out these men lied to me and duped me, he couldn't do anything about it. So that we might think, well, the king is the king. He can do whatever. He doesn't have to have a reason to punish her. Well, apparently it wasn't that simple for the Persians. According to the law, he says, what can be done to her? So what I see in that is, can you come up with some legal loophole or excuse for me to do something to her to punish her, and I can get away with it? Yeah, Dean? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so usually the way it worked is the king, whatever the king says is that's basically law. So if the king says, do this, kill this person, now they're going to go and kill that person, but if the king all of a sudden says, don't kill that person, well then they're not going to kill that person. It's the same power behind each, even though one was the exact opposite. But with the Persians, once, not just the king said it, but once this law was into place, that's it. And again, like I said, that's going to play a significant role later in the book of Esther, because of the Haman did a similar thing that how they tricked with the lion's den. They couldn't revoke the law, so they had to just enact another law that would help the Jews against the former law. So he wants a way, how can I much like it would be today, I guess. What can be done legally? How can we spin this, a very popular thing today, how can we spin this story, how can we spin this situation so that I can get revenge on her for making me look or feel like a fool? And they earn their paycheck today. They said, and I just get some very extreme suck-up vibes here. These guys, like I said, they were probably just as slick and cunning as any snake in the grass anywhere. So they said, the one, I guess maybe chief among them, he said, it's not just against the king that Queen Vashti's done wrong. She's done wrong against every one of the officials and all the peoples in the whole empire. Because her behavior, I'll tell you what's going to happen. Her behavior is going to be made known to all the women. And she's going to influence them to look on their husbands with contempt. Howard, you have something?
If he was drunk on wine, why should she have to obey anything he said?
That's how we would think of it, yeah. That's how we would think of it, yeah. Why would, it's not right, you know. Yeah, probably. He probably had been for the last 6 months, you know. Yeah, she, I don't see her as a hero here, but I sympathize with her, anybody who is the queen to a guy like this.
He was drunk and he was trying to show her off like a prize cow or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see no reason why he should have anything to stand on.
Yeah, the main virtue that I see, or the positive thing I see about Vashti in this is, or even a glimmer, is if she had been a vain woman, like Potiphar's wife, for instance. You pluck Potiphar's wife out of the book of Genesis and put her here as the queen, she's going in that room. Not because she wants to do what the king said, but because she'll want to flaunt her beauty. But the fact that she did not take this opportunity to do that may suggest a little bit about her character. It may not suggest it. She may have just been like, well, normally I wouldn't mind doing that, but since he told me to, I'm not going to. And if that's the case, then that's not, she deserves no credit.
You have to assume, though, that she generally obeyed him or she wouldn't have been queen all this time.
Yeah, well, we don't know how long she had been queen, but she probably did not tell him no very often. Or maybe she didn't get very many commands from him very often. But this is how they did it. This was the stunt, the political stunt. Now, I want to go ahead and say that their reasoning, the motives for this explanation were totally corrupt, but it's not far from the truth. I mean, it's not like it's ridiculous to reason this way.
Because it is true, like if a mother, say, displays for her daughters, you know, like if the dynamic in the household is very...
If the mom beats up the dad all the time,
what the Bible teaches,
then the daughters, how do you think they're going to treat their husbands? So there is truth, there is something there. But that's not to say that they actually were worried about this. They weren't really worried about this. This is just what they were telling the king and what they were going to put in the newspaper, so to speak. You know, the official statement will be this. This is why you're going to say that she is being punished because of this. Now, we all know, or we should, that the real reason she was being punished is because of what we already said. She made him feel and look stupid. But this is the official, which is why politics is such an almost inherently evil and nasty business, because you've got the truth and then you've got the official statement. And they very rarely come together. And what people deserve is the truth. But what they're going to get is the official political statement, which is this. The queen is a danger to the nation. What she did is a danger to the nation. So they're going to make her an example. They're going to make an example out of her. That's how they pulled it off. So that the decree was going to be and let me point this out. It just caught my attention. The language of verse 17 may suggest that it wasn't even that Queen Vashti said no, but just that she didn't go. So that's another possibility that we have to consider in there. It may not be that she told the men no outright, but they said the queen summons you, they leave, or the king summons you, they leave, and she just never goes. That's what it, in verse 17, the statement, the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look on at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she didn't come. Maybe that suggests that she didn't just say no. But here was the decree. Let it be written in the law, among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed. Terrible system of law, unless Jesus is the king, okay, then this is a terrible system of law. But it was their system of law. Cannot be repealed. Vashti is never again to come before King Xerxes. At all. She's not going to be queen anymore, and she is not to ever come before your presence. Now, what are some reasons do you think that they may have wanted to include that in there?
Because what if he wanted to see her again?
Okay.
Like, she can't even request to speak with him, like she's not allowed to come anywhere.
I've got a feeling Vashti, if she is half as beautiful as she seems to be presented to be, could probably be pretty persuasive when she wanted to be. She's not the queen just because she's easy on the eyes. She's queen probably because of other reasons, like she was she had an aura about her. What if she came to the king and swayed him, got in his favor? Who do you think is going to be in deep trouble? Them. So this was very clever. Xerxes, if he is swayed by Vashti, he's not going to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have expelled you or banished you. He's going to say, that was their idea. They did that, so he's going to punish them. So they included in it, in the laws that cannot be repealed, that she can't ever even come before you. She can never see you again. Very clever, and also proves a little bit of their motive. So the decree was made to all the kingdom. It pleased the king, and they did exactly what he did, exactly as they suggested. They deposed her. She is no longer the queen, and again, very politically, the official statement was, he sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his household and speak according to the language of his people. This was tied in with we got to keep the women from rising up in rebellion against their husbands based on the queen's example. And again, that's not utterly ridiculous, but their motives were totally impure, and they were just trying to find a way to give the king what he wanted, which is a legal way to punish her in a way that didn't make him look even more petty by punishing her just because she said no or refused something that he said. So this is the stunt, the political stunt they pulled, like true politicians. All right, applications. Got 3 in this one. That one nearly knocked me out of my chair, because we all normally have 2. Every single lesson we have 2 in the book, but there were 3 this time. One of them is just to understand that the account of Vashti, what Vashti did, is here simply to provide perspective about Xerxes, but also primarily to tell us about the circumstances that led to Esther coming into the picture. And because that's the case, which we've already talked about, there are details that we just don't have. I would love to know more about this. I would love for somebody to find an old, trustworthy book or scroll that tells some of this that we could trust that it's true, but we don't have that. But we can, as we already said, it does seem to show that Vashti, at the very least, did not take advantage of an opportunity to flaunt herself in a vain way. We can take that, whether her motive was pure or not. She was unwilling to be the focal point of this feast. But again, the book seems to suggest that the text presents her in a positive light, and I would say the text does not present her in a positive light. It doesn't present her in any light. Number two, we got to be careful about surrounding ourselves with naysayers. You ever heard of a naysayer? Do you know any naysayers? What's a naysayer? Don't say somebody that says nay. What's a naysayer? A glass half empty? Basically, they just say no. No all the time. Well, a yaysayer, then, is somebody who says yes all the time. A yes man. In other words, somebody that just is going to tell you what you want to hear, period. That's what the kings were very prone to have around them. People who just say whatever they want. That's not a very good life. I feel sorry for celebrities and other people of power, because it is probably so hard for them to have somebody in their life that will actually tell them something sincere and true and honest. Because most people don't want to say that. They want them to like them. They want to have their favor. So they're going to tell them, yeah, that looks good, or yeah, this or that, instead of being honest. Or say, you know that thing you did, you probably shouldn't have done that. They're not going to say that. They're going to, if nothing else, just not touch it. So I feel sorry for people like that. Kings especially should want people around them that are going to be straight with them, even when they don't like it. And anybody that does that are always my favorite characters, whether it's fictional or historical. The person who has the courage to tell a king the truth, even if he doesn't want to hear it, like Micaiah back in the days of Jehoshaphat and Ahab. He said, all those 450 prophets told him, go to war and God will be with you. Micaiah was the one that said, you better not go to war or you're going to die. We need that we don't have people around us that are just going to tell us what we want to hear. We need people around us that are going to tell us the truth out of love and respect. Finally, number 3. Just because their reasoning was marred by insincere motives doesn't have any reflection whatsoever on the fact that God does have a plan for the home. And that plan is that the husband is to be the head of the home. And that includes over the wife, as well as the kids. Not just the kids, not just the dog, and not just the cat, but the wife as well. So, sure, these men were corrupt and they were just doing their corrupt things, but that doesn't mean that what they said is wrong necessarily, because in both Old and New Covenant, especially emphasized in the New Covenant, is that the husband, the man, is to be the head of the household according to God's plan, and the wife should submit to him and respect him in that way. But of course, if Xerxes was telling her to do something sinful, then that put her in a difficult position. But again, I don't think the text suggests that in any way whatsoever. She refused for whatever reason she wanted to refuse, not because of some high morality, being more of a moral person with a greater conscience, and she wasn't going to sin, because I'm sure she didn't shy away from sin of all kinds under other circumstances.